Let's read it together. We are witnesses and custodians of the greatest mystery and beneficiaries of the most beautiful love story in cosmic history. My guess is you already know that, and you're here because of that reason. Sirs, we want to know Jesus. In most translation, it says we want to see Jesus. But if you do a little bit of word study in the ancient text, it means to know Jesus. So what we're doing in our series is recognizing the truth that there is a difference between knowing about Jesus and knowing Jesus. So, week 1, we learned that. Week 2, we learned that. Actually, 2 through 4. Week 5, we learned that. And week 6, we learned that. And week 7, we learned that. And week 8, we learned that. And week 9, we learned that. Now we're at week 10. So how many changes have you made in your life since we started the series? How many of you made 9 changes? 8 changes. 7 changes. Wait a minute. Oh, Rose made 7. How many did you make online? Average of 6.7? Okay, average of 6.7. How many of you made 6.7 changes in your life? Okay, Jim made 6.7. 5, 4, 3. You know what happens when you get to 0? 2, 1. Crickets. And that's exactly right. Nothing happens when we don't change. Right? No big blow up. So let's see if we can do it with week 10. And here's the question this morning. What kind of character really gets to know Jesus? See how I've deliberately worded the sentence? What kind of character really gets to know Jesus? In other words, I'm counting on all of you to be characters in some way, shape, or form, because that's exactly what Zacchaeus was. So we're going to take a few moments this morning to sort of character profile a Jesus knower. And fortunately, I have the only picture of Zacchaeus ever to exist in the modern world, and here he is. And I mean, he's a guy you want to know as your tax collector, right? If this guy came knocking on your door saying, the franchise tax board has determined that your taxes, you actually owe $123.18. What would you do? Yeah, you'd probably go quickly to your checkbook and write a check because you would know this guy. And so, okay, so now I'm going to do one other thing with you this morning. So this morning is a 10-point sermon. Now you're probably saying like Nima did, yeah, okay, I'll see you next week. When I told him that. And I said, yeah, but I have a reason for doing this because I want to show people that the character profile we're about to do is something that you all can do because you all have the same professor I had in putting together today's sermon over the last 6 weeks. And you know who your professor is? Professor Google. Everything that you see this morning, I found online. Everything. So you can do it too. No excuses. So next week when I say, how many changes have you made? When I say, how about 10? You can say, well, we were only 6.7 last week, so 7.7. All right, so I want to show you how to do this kind of it's called an inductive Bible study. And then I'm going to want to do what's called an exposition. In other words, I want to expose what it means for all of us. That sound okay? Ready? All right, so anybody going to break out a pen? Prick their finger, write in blood, do whatever? Or do you just want me to send you the notes this week? I'll send you the PowerPoint. Okay, here we go. First, Zacchaeus is context proof. What in the world is that? I bet you've never heard that in a sermon before, but here. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. How many of you have ever been to Jericho? Okay. 3 of us have been to Jericho. It's a really interesting place. Really, really very interesting. Why? Because, well, that's what the old city looked like. You can find this online. And that's where the old city stood in relation to the Dead Sea, which is down at the bottom, the Sea of Galilee, which is up at the top, where we've been for a few weeks when Jesus was, walking around with the disciples and teaching. And then over to the left of the red dot on the left, over farther left is Jerusalem. And these distances are not really far from each other. So I want to give you a little bit of context. Jericho is the oldest city that we know of on the face of the earth. 9,000 BCE. That means it's over 11,000 years old. It was a Canaanite city noted for practicing, and I'm taking the word right out of Numbers, detestable things. When God uses this word detestable, this is like strike three in baseball. This is the worst word that can be used. And why did he use that word? Because they were sacrificing infants alive. And there was so much prostitution that almost everybody had a sexually transmitted disease that we've been able to do some sampling on their bones with. So this was a pretty bad place. Jesus is visiting, but guess what? To Zacchaeus, this is home. How does home affect people? Usually, they kind of go with the flow, right? So you would expect that Zacchaeus was a person who had gone with the flow of Jericho, and actually reading the text, you might think, yeah, no wonder. He was a chief tax collector and he was really rich. And he talks about overcharging in taxes and extorting people for their money. So you think, okay, sounds like Zacchaeus was kind of like a part of the culture. But the meaning of this little passage is this. Just at the start, Jesus will go into any context to meet a soul that needs to know him. Now, if you were reading that text, you could find this all out. Okay, so we've gotten to verse 1. All right, clean. So context proof, clean. And there was a man called by the name of Zacchaeus. Guess what his name means in Aramaic and Hebrew? It means clean or pure. Whoa. How did Zacchaeus get to be clean or pure in the context of detestable? So we've only gotten to the very opening words of this chapter, and look at the challenge you're facing. Zacchaeus' parents, like many of us, have a godly vision for their son, but he's not yet lived into it. He's followed his culture. But their vision was that he'd be clean and pure. But it feels like his culture has almost overwhelmed him. You getting the picture? He was the chief tax collector. That's exactly what it says. And I emphasized it when I read it, right? He was rich. Here's why I said that. Well, the chief tax collector means he was an extremely important and powerful civil servant. Why do I say that? Because he collects taxes from the king. He collects taxes from the tribal leader of Jericho. Everybody's under his thumb. And when it says he was rich, you almost can tell by the Greek word plusius. Plusius, like plus. He was rich plus. He was abundantly wealthy. So what does this mean? Well, Zacchaeus, like many people, including people in our day, defined his life by collecting power, possessions, prestige, partnerships with people. But he hadn't collected the most important thing that a human being can add to their life, which is knowing Jesus. Now we're only a few verses in, and see how much we can understand about him. The fourth thing about Zacchaeus, he was curious. Zacchaeus was trying to see who Jesus was. Now, this little phrase, trying to see, if you just read it in English, it sounds like, well, he was a short guy. Of course, he was just trying to see. Kind of like all of you were trying to see when Nima and I came and sat over here and you couldn't see the screen anymore because both of us are kind of tall. Trying to see, but it not only means physical sight, it means more. In this case, it means curious, desirous to experience. He wanted to discern. This all comes from the history of the word, even to the point of being aware or beware. In other words, not only know the good side, but know the bad side. Bottom line is, he wants to know. He wants to know Jesus, and that's our key phrase for the whole series. Sirs, we want to know Jesus. We want to kind of get inside and experience life like him, and there we go back to mercy. So human beings can be merciful too. If they want to get to know somebody, they sit down and they talk and they spend time and they become intimate with one another. All right, so what does this mean? Zacchaeus, like many people, was insatiably curious as a collector. So far, his reference was power and possessions and prestige and partnerships with other people. But he was always sampling, even things apparently out of his reach. He wasn't afraid to add, to change. Getting the picture? Okay. So he'd also learned how to compensate. This should be really apparent. And he was unable due to the crowd because he was short in stature. Short? Guess what it means? Micro. It's the Greek word mikros. So, Carol, we know each other really well. Stand up. What would you say? Is Carol mikros? No. Carol is tall. You know why? Because people in Jericho are about this tall. So, you giant of a Massachusettsite. Mikros means really small. When we went to England, we were driving on an old road going toward Cheddar, England. Yes, that's where the cheese is made. And off to the left, we saw this little church. So we stopped. Rose and I love churches, and we were with our singing team, so they had to love churches too. So we got off our bus, and we walked into this little church. It was an old Norman church. So we're talking about 1000 AD. Guess how tall the entry from the sacristy was into the church? This tall. So when I wanted to get up into the pulpit, which was attached to the sacristy in this case, I had to go into the room and get on my hands and knees and get up in the preaching desk. The preaching desk, which sat above the floor, was this high when I was standing on the floor. When I got up to stand in the preaching desk was down here. God help me if I was 50 years of age trying to read the text. And there was no PowerPoint. That's mikros. So Zacchaeus was mikros. But this word stature, we've run across it before, haven't we? Do you remember? Spiritual formation. Jesus grew in what? Wisdom, stature, favor with both God and man. So this word stature is not just about height. It's about maturity. Remember Luke 2:52? So he is wanting the same thing that Jesus needed to grow in. That sounds like somebody who wants to know more about Jesus. I think only Bob caught that. What did I say that was wrong? I said about. He doesn't want to just know more about Jesus. He wants to know Jesus. Okay, so the meaning? Zacchaeus' stature was stunted, but he did not let nature stand in the way of nurture. He wanted to integrate heart, soul, mind, and strength to become a giant of maturity. But in order to do that, you kind of have to be competitive. So he ran on ahead. Now, this doesn't mean that he was fast. This means he had a plan. Look at what it means. Not only ran to the front, but ran in advance. It was his strategy. So if he were a stockbroker and lived in New York City, when would he be getting up in the morning? Yeah, like 2 a.m. to find out what the Asian markets were doing, to find out what the Nikkei was doing, to find out what the Chinese markets were doing, to see what was going on all around the world so that he was ready to take his shower at 3:30, put on his suit at 4, walk to the deli to get something to eat at 4:30, be at the door at 5 o'clock, taking phone calls from people who also got up early saying, what do you advise me to do in terms of my portfolio today? And then when the doors opened, he was on the floor. He goes in advance because he has a strategy. Meaning, Zacchaeus was successful, staying ahead of the pack with purpose, vision, mission, goals, objectives, and strategies. Oh, if you're a business person, doesn't this just sound like heaven? And he was about to know his match, not just meet his match. That's the first way that I wrote that slide, meet his match. And then I thought, no, he wants to know his match. So he was a climber. This passage was the passage that started me out on this series. And the original title for this sermon was, if you want to be a follower of Jesus, you have to climb down out of your tree. But over the weeks, as I've been working on it, I wanted to take this approach. And he climbed up the sycamore tree. Do we know about sycamores in California? That's those other trees other than palm trees. And neither palm trees or sycamore trees are native to Southern California. Did you know that? Do you know what they first wanted to do with sycamore trees? Make railroad ties out of them because they grew fast. You know what they miscalculated? Where they're from, in Australia, most of ours are from Australia, there is a little insect that actually causes those trees to have a stronger constitution. Sycamores basically have to struggle to get that big in Australia. The bug didn't get imported here. So all of those railroad ties that they wanted to make after they cut them in just a few days were all warped and out of shape. And when they tried to use them on the railroad kind of went like this. But we know how big these trees can get, right? Climbs up in a sycamore tree in order to see him. So climbed up, you would think, well, that just means climb like normal. It takes some effort. But this word means ascending. It's often used of people who are climbing mountains, not just trees. In other words, he's climbing above the base camp. He's getting up to the point where he's about ready to climb to the top of the Himalayas. And what does this mean for us? Well, Zacchaeus never let his perspective be obscured. He always rose to the occasion, eliminating obstacles that would defeat anyone else. So, are you getting a picture of this person now? He could have let his context, he could have let his stature, all kinds of things keep him from knowing Jesus. And yet nothing was going to stand in his way. That's the character of a disciple. Nothing is going to stand in the way of a true disciple. He was compliant. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for today I must stay at your house. There's no account here that says Zacchaeus thought to himself, I haven't told my wife. I'm going to be in such big trouble. What does he say? He knows exactly. And he hurried and came down. This compliance is really important. Come down, and he came down. There's a parallelism here, and it teaches us that obedience is always immediately productive when it comes to Jesus. Don't you wish you'd obeyed more when you were given wisdom? And don't you regret the times when you were given wisdom that you didn't obey? Well, Zacchaeus wasn't going to be in that situation. What does this mean? Zacchaeus was an enigma because I did it my way success is not often connected with compliance. But he learned to use everything to his advantage. All of this came from the internet. Well, maybe not some of the insightful thinking. I hope I added a little bit. He was confident, and Zacchaeus received Jesus joyfully. Guess what? That word is really important. You know what it means? He was favorably disposed. He was leaning toward grace. Why? Because that word is constructed out of the root word for grace. In fact, we find this word when it says, rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven at the end of the Beatitudes. It was also used of the shepherds. They rejoiced with exceeding great joy when they found out that Jesus had come. So what does this mean? Zacchaeus was likely a very self-motivated, diligent, dedicated, and proud of achieving. Yet he also made room for the unexpected gifts of opportunity via God's grace. Regrets. I've had a few, but then again, too few to mention. Remember him? He was your hero, right? No. He's an okay singer, but not your hero. Because regrets, I've had a few. We knew of a lot of regrets. He was a non-complainer. Ready for this one? When the people saw this, they all began to complain, saying, he has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. You can just feel the despising from a group of people who are known as detestable. Did you get that? So what does the word complain mean here? You're going to love this one. Complain means to murmur or grumble. Oh yeah, I figured that out. But the word is also, don't you love this word? Onomatopoetic. You know what that means? It sounds like what it is. And guess what it sounds like? It sounds like the buzzing of bees. In fact, I tried to pronounce it. I'm not going to do that this morning, but I tried to pronounce it, and it goes something like, it really does. It has Z's in it. And it's only used in Luke and in the New Testament 2 times. The first time is about morally complaining against God, and the second time is this one. So who figured out what the words were if these people sounded like, you know, in the cartoons, when they can't say the bad word, they put squiggles and all kinds of things? That's what this is. Sinner. Depraved. You know what depraved means? Unable to distinguish between light and dark. And who's the only person who's able to do that? Blind person. They've completely lost the power of sight. If you can't discern between black and white, light and dark. And this was used as the understanding of sinner. And guess what? It connects to detestable. Starting to get the picture? So what does this mean? Zacchaeus was not a complainer. He knew it was, say this with me, time wasting, solution killing, opportunity squandering, distracting, negative, and counterproductive. Are you a complainer? Meet your profile. But Zacchaeus knew spending time complaining is a waste of time. And what's the one thing you can't get back in your life? Time. That's why money is so important to people, because they exchange time for money. You can get money back, but you can never get time back. Think of that when you want to write that nasty email, and write the second email first. Okay. He was a connector. But Zacchaeus stopped and said to the Lord, "Behold, Lord, half of my possessions I'm giving to the poor. And if I've extorted anything from anyone, I am giving back 4 times as much." You say, connector, does that mean that he connects with people? No, in this case, what it means is he's connecting, or he's integrating what he's learning from Jesus and how he's going to behave. Zacchaeus stopped. It means he stood up. In other words, at his home, after hearing Jesus speak, Zacchaeus was sitting with everybody else, and suddenly it hit him. I know what to do. And he stood up. And he established himself, and he made himself steadfast. That's what that word means. And then he said, half of my possessions I'm giving to the poor. And everybody around the table went, whoa. Some of them were going to now be filthy rich because he cheated them. And they hung on his next words, my extortions I am returning 4-fold. Remember, this is the guy who's Plusius. Plus, he's 4 times wealthier than you can even imagine. He can give this away. He's probably still going to be wealthy. But suddenly he's going to make everybody around him wealthy too, because he's probably extorted something from everybody or overcharged them somehow. What does this mean? In a flash, Zacchaeus made the lightning connection between who he was becoming and how he should be behaving. He was integrating life with Jesus. That means he was changed. And Jesus said to him, today, salvation has come to this house. Why? Because he was giving away his money? No, because his heart had been changed and it was affecting his behavior. I heard of a congregation one time that as their minister began to preach on tithes, offerings, and almsgiving, one guy greeted him at the door and said, you know, preacher, you stopped preaching and gone to meddling. And the reply was, I'm going to preach this message until everybody changes. Why? Because money is exchanged for time, and time you can't get back. So that's why money is so valuable. Because he too is the son of Abraham, for the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. Salvation not only means entrance into the kingdom of God because of forgiveness, it means healing. It means the relational gap between yourself and God is healed. Son of Abraham means today, Zacchaeus, you were in name only a part of the family. Now you're really home. You're a God struggler, an Israelite that's come home. Seek and save that which was lost. In other words, he was found. He was returning to home. Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall never lack anything I need. All the way down to the bottom of the psalm. And I will live in the house of the Lord forever. The shepherd's goal is not just to take care of the sheep during the day, but to get them home at night. God will get you home. The meaning. Zacchaeus was living into his calling and his name. He was being changed, integrating his life as a disciple and becoming a witness of God's grace by knowing Jesus. When you get to know Jesus, you change. You can be a complainer, Jesus, I've never done it this way before. I don't see the reasonability of this. In fact, I have a lot of other opinions that tell me something different. Okay, fine. Be a complainer. Take your time. Or you can just say, Jesus, you said you're God. In my understanding of God, you know everything. So you know what? I think I'll just give up the complaining, and I think I'll just do it. I'll just do it. What have you saved? Complaining? Probable rebellion? What have you gained? Everything. Everything. Where did I say I got all this information? Google. Professor Google. Where else do we get this kind of information? From the Bible, from God's revelation of himself, and from experience. So week 10, kind of character really gets to know Jesus. You ready? I'm going to put it all together in one paragraph. Here it goes. Zacchaeus triumphed over his detestable context to live up to his name and into his calling to be clean. His occupation as chief tax collector could not hold him hostage. He was insatiably curious enough to compensate for every shortcoming and competitive enough to outpace his peers. Climbing out of his cave, I did that just for you philosophy folks. Oh, don't take a picture yet, there's more. Climbing out of his cave, he was compliant, spending time with Jesus, placing his confidence in God and separating himself from the self-limiting distraction of complaining. I've got a better slide, you can wait. He connected with Jesus and was changed forever. And that's what it looks like. Now take the picture all together. You did this from Google? Yep. And the Bible. And life experience. And I've been working on it for 6 weeks. And I've been changed by it. I've been rethinking a few things in my own life and thinking, you know what? I've been a little Zacchaeus-like. Maybe I need to be a little more Jesus-like. And everybody said, amen. That's okay. I don't mind if you say amen to the minister saying, I need to be a little more Jesus-like. So, if you're a Jesus knower, what do you learn from this? How can you live it out in your daily life? First, don't let context determine your character. Jesus doesn't care where you live. He cares that you know him and live in him. Second, live into your calling to be clean. Every one of us has that calling. Every one of us is a Zacchaeus. Easily give away earthly collections in favor of knowing Jesus. You can't take it with you when you go. And you're going to him. He's not going to be impressed with whatever you've collected. He will be impressed if you know him. Be insatiably curious. Don't let a day go by that you don't learn something about Jesus. That's why we have the Book of Common Prayer. Multiple scripture passages a day. One of those has to catch fire. Compensate for shortcomings. If you don't know what yours are, ask the person that loves you the most. They will tell you. Be competitive and outpace your peers. In other words, have a strategy, have a plan to be a disciple. Climb out of your cave. Come into the sunlight of Jesus. Be compliant. Spend time with Jesus. I got an awful note yesterday. My screen time was down. My Apple phone let me know that I had spent only 80% of what I normally spend on my phone. I was 20% deficient. Why? Because I was comparing this sermon. I think it's infinitely better that I prepare the sermon and tell you that I was 20% deficient on my phone, right? You don't want that flipped. Place your confidence in God. Don't be distracted by being a complainer. Remember that word? Remember when the disciples were complaining? That word means to sound like a bunch of mooing cows. This word means to sound like a bunch of buzzing bees. Connect with Jesus to know him. And finally, you'll be changed forever to Jesus' character. See how you end up with character at the top and at the bottom? That means that your vision has been fulfilled. So, what you gonna do? That's always the important question. What are you gonna do? Because knowing is practicing. Incarnate the word. Don't just hear it.